Thank you for joining us. Julie has got, I don't need to tell people who Julie Bindel is because they know, and most of us probably follow you all on Twitter. Want a quick sort of catch up on everything you do. I'm astonished at the output that you have, your output on Unherd, your books, your commentary on something, your articles that you write. I was struck by one I think it was just put out today. I might be wrong on that on the Ready Jews with Yehudis Fletcher. If anybody's not read it, you can check out. It's on Unheard. Julie's Unheard. It's really emotional and struggling. There must be you do so much of this. It's not just this sex realism fight that you've come into the middle of. There's so many other angles and women in areas of in times of danger, in times of stress that are really struggling and standing up that you're highlighting there. How would you find? I'm interested to know how you came across Yehudis and came to that.
Well, the work that I've done, the campaigning that I've done all my adult life is on male violence against women and girls. And it's the only reason why I reacted to the gender madness 20 years ago and the what was then described as transsexuality and being born in the wrong body and men claiming to be women, because it was obvious it was a massive safeguarding issue and it was patriarchy on stilts. So for me, it was never a single or separate issue, and it still isn't. So I met Yehudis Fletcher, who's a Haredi woman, which is the best way to describe that is that she is ultra, well, the Haredis are ultra Orthodox Jews, and Yehudis was raised within that community. Subsequently came out as a lesbian, disclosed that she'd been sexually abused by a foster carer, was responsible in part for getting him locked up, and remains within that community in Manchester, which is, I think, the second largest Jewish community in the UK, as an out lesbian, and moves within it and does brilliant work in campaigning to end forced marriage and highlighting the issue of the secrecy and complicity around child sexual abuse within closed religious communities. So she's just an all-round star, really. And
Mm.
I interviewed her for Unheard. She has a book out called Chutzpah, and yeah, she's definitely worth looking up.
Mm. Well, we will. It sounds like she's got a book out. We might want to maybe think about getting her here for a conversation with us about it. That sounds like I was quite impacted by what you'd written. Um, so on to the gender stuff. It leads both ways. That it leads both to the gender issue, the sex realist issue, and also to your book. I'm going to come on to your book second. First of all, because you were a key player in the Supreme Court judgment that we had. You were one of the key players because, as part of the Lesbian Project, you were one of the interveners on that. Now, I've heard you talk about this, Samantha. So if you just go over it again. I was astonished. I was in court listening to it, and the tongue twisting, the mind twisting that was going on. The issue of lesbians was absolutely spot on for highlighting exactly why this doesn't work. And I really think I was in a breakout room because there was so many people there, and it was just difficult to contain the laughter when we heard what. So, from your perspective, can you just give us a little picture on that?
Obviously, this was for Women Scotland's case, and there were several interveners, including Sex Matters, for our side. And the lesbian interveners were made up of three groups: the LGB Alliance, Scottish Lesbians, and the Lesbian Project, which I co-founded with Kathleen Stock a couple of years ago. And it was obvious that the judges were in a complete just confusion, really, really flummoxed when the KC for the Scottish ministers started talking about these men who have the sex of their acquired gender. And this was a phrase that she used over and over again. And she was arguing about these case studies. So you've got one, as she put it, trans woman who has a gender recognition certificate, and therefore she was saying, on behalf of the ministers, is legally a lesbian and should be allowed to be recognized as a lesbian and therefore come into our spaces. And we wouldn't have the right to tell him not to. So there's one bloke. And then there's another bloke, exactly the same in physical attributes, but who doesn't have a gender recognition certificate, who be couldn't then argue that he was legally a lesbian. But the problem is, as the judges pointed out, you're not allowed to ask a trans woman for a gender recognition certificate because that would be discrimination under the Equality Act. So how would you know that Dave over here, that looks exactly the same as Pete over there, how would you know which one was supposed to be legally a lesbian? And the KC said, well, of course you could ask her for her birth certificate. And the judges' faces were a picture because, of course, you're not going to do that. Of course, he wouldn't have that with him. Of course, it wouldn't make any difference anyway. And it was all just bonkers. There was that time, Heather, I don't know, if you were in the breakout room, you'll remember this, where the judge who was questioning the KC said, doesn't this have a chilling effect on lesbians who wish to organise autonomously without men? She was saying no, because of course these women, these lesbians, they wouldn't be legally allowed to gather as lesbians. But if there was some kind of philosophical society, then they could. So if, for example, you were talking about the work of, I don't know, Judith Butler, or if you were a gender critical group, as she put it, then a trans woman who would come along who agrees with us would be allowed in. So it was all a complete bonkers shit show.
Mhm.
And at that stage, and I don't normally make these predictions because I've sat through too many court cases where the wrong decision or verdict um, has been handed down. But I knew then that we'd won without any doubt or hesitation. And the KC knew it as well because she kept angling for an early lunch, didn't she?
She
She was
did. She did.
she was saying,
It's a tactic. I-
I'm very minded of the time, my lord. And the judges just ignored her because it was only about 12:30. So it was
No,
bonkers.
yeah, it's a tactic because Robin Moira White was the barrister in the pool, Harriet Haynes, um, against the English Blackpool Federation. And he quite frequently said, should we have a break now? Shall we have a break? Or is it time for lunch now? So, it's clearly a tactic when they're feeling a bit uncomfortable and that they're not winning.
Well,
Um,
it was a good moment, wasn't it, when she said, I mean, I started to feel sorry for her a little bit, but then I remembered,
yeah.
no, actually don't. When she said that she would like over lunch to do some kind of flow chart to show exactly who can be classed legally as a lesbian and who can't, and different gender identities. And look, no KC, however eminent, however experienced, however senior, could have argued that case because it was more bonkers than arguing that the earth is flat. The reason being, as we all appreciate, is that the vast majority of people haven't actually gone around the world and don't understand
Mhm.
the science behind how it was discovered that the world is not in fact flat and how it's round. So for some people, they would have a genuine doubt every now and again of, oh yes, but what if?
Mhm.
But this, anyway, it was a very good day when the decision was handed down. But for me, and I know for many others as well, the jubilation was very, very quickly replaced with anger.
Mhm.
Depression followed by anger. I think because of the terrible toll on so many women
Mhm.
and the terrible toll on the women that we'll never know their names. We don't know their lives and their circumstances. All the parents, some of whom I've interviewed, that have seen their children have their lives pretty much ruined by this. So it was a difficult thing to celebrate. It was, of course, necessary to celebrate it because it was huge and we knew it would bring about a normative change. Stonewall law was at an end. It was the beginning of the end for the Liberals burying their head in the sand and pretending this was all another Section 28 or whatever nonsense they
Mhm.
excuse themselves with. But it's terrible. It's terrible
Mhm.
that we have to go through this.
And it's not over, despite Supreme Court. I mean, they're seriously fighting against it. I know that there's the PCS union, some union conferences going on at the moment, and certainly two today, where there's some horrendous stories of the bullying and intimidation that have been going on, and women in one tears. But I think they were tears for dramatic effect because she was I think she was pushing the conclusion element, women. Okay, so you know, there's a long way to go. EHRC guidance is out. We'll be looking at that. There's 6 weeks to have a look at that and make our comments on it. So still a long way to go. It's not job done by any means.
But it's the beginning of the end. And the thing is that there'll be many, many, many more women, some men, children that will continue to suffer, and the material consequences for them will be huge. But what has shifted and where we are seeing things coming to an end is, as I say, the mass capitulation,
Mhm.
the cowardice, the inertia, the just anything for a quiet life.
Mhm.
This is something that they can no longer hide behind. As I say, Stonewall law, and hopefully Stonewall will will be no more soon.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I don't like to wish people to lose their jobs and to be unemployed. And of course, there's plenty of people within that organization that literally needed a job and they're not ideologically driven. But the movers and shakers, the ones that brought this about, and the ones that kept it going for so long with the no debate, the Stonewall law, the protection racket with training corporations and institutions in the law that they wanted to see, that
Mhm.
trans activists dictated to them that they should. That has had a much, much bigger effect than I think we can even realize. The only thing that I could liken it to, that Stonewall protection racket, was when I was doing a book on the global sex trade few years ago, and I would go to countries that have legalized or decriminalized prostitution, which is always bad for women. It's always great for the men and the pimps. Doesn't give the women any protection, and as I'm sure many of you appreciate, just increases numbers of women in the sex trade, increases all of the things that are terrible. And I was wondering how on earth tourists that go to Amsterdam, for example, where it is legalized, and see the window brothels in the centre, and then come back and say things like it's great for the women there in Holland. We should do it in the UK. That would be an end to the problems for the women. It would decrease the violence. It would bring it up from underground. The men would be better behaved. And I thought, why do they believe this? Because all you have to do is walk around and see the women hanging like pieces of meat in the windows, and they're obviously all being pimped and are miserable, and levels of violence are off the scale. And then I discovered that the biggest pro-pimping organization called the Prostitute Information Centre, which is a for-profit organization based right in the centre of the window brothel area, they train the tour guides. They train them. So these tour guides then take German, French, Swiss,
Mhm.
British tourists around the window brothels and tell them a load of lies. It's just like Stonewall. And that has such a massive effect, that misinformation that comes from so-called experts. That's what we're now going to see the end of with Stonewall.
Good. Um, at last. Right, I'm going to move on because time is tight. I could talk about that a lot longer. Um, and I'm going to segue to the book with something that struck me both from the Supreme Court, from my own life, people in my life, and also the book. And it's about language, and it's about the word lesbian. So lesbian is such a dirty word now. It's a bad word. Um, and except the only way the word lesbian is not a bad word is if you're using it about a man, apparently. And how do we get back from this so you can use it down to that? So here's a book, everybody. Um, I actually listened to it because I've been doing a lot of driving, so I got it on audio. So I've been listening to Julie's dulcet tones on the for the I can't remember how many hours worth it was, but it was well worth it anyway. The problem is I didn't get to make notes in the on the in the pages. I was absolutely it was a thoroughly good read for somebody that's not a lesbian. You don't have to be a lesbian to read the book, or to enjoy it. I It was really good. There was a lot I didn't know. You've been educating me a lot, and like some of my best friends are lesbians, but there's a lot of the history that I didn't know. I'm not going to take time going over all that now. So what I'd like to go to jump to is I thought it was really interesting. The two elements are really interesting for me, and one was the gay rights versus the lesbian rights, and when it was realised that that wasn't going to work, that the gay movement was promoting um, activities and actions and pushing for legalization of some things that would do women harm if it was that was the same applied to women. Um, so I'd like you just to, if you could, just what you have to say about that. And the other thing is that struck me as role models. So again, I was thinking about the younger people. You touch on this towards the end of the book. Who are the role models? I can't. I tried to think of who are gay role models at the moment that aren't performative and probably out as trans at the moment. Who are the Have we got some younger lesbians coming up? How do they get space? Because I can't see any of this changing um, without some good high profile role models out there. I know that's you, of course, are a role model, Julie, but maybe more for someone like me than.
No, I think we need to be able to nurture younger lesbians who wish to be public facing, who are proud of being lesbians, and who have felt that prejudice towards them, maybe in their university LGBTQIA plus groups led by men, or those women that are so anti-feminist and so anti-women in general that they just bully other women out of it. So we do need that. And there's this assumption that younger feminists and younger lesbians, so just younger women of all stripes, don't want to listen to older women, don't ever want to be like adopt any of the viewpoints or aims and objectives of held by older women. And in some ways that's true, but in many ways it's not, because when you're a lesbian and there's so few of us and we're under such attack, and have been in particular the last few years, I think the best thing that we can do is have intergenerational conversations and support type groups. When I came out, I was in my teens and I met older feminists, many of whom were lesbians. They were all about 15 years older than me at the time, the particular groups that I ended up meeting in Leeds. And, although I'm sure I irritated them massively and they would irritate me, they looked after me. I learned everything from them. it was and remains a great relationship that I've got with some of those same women who are now, well into their 70s. And and I do think that we shouldn't just assume that younger women don't want to talk to us. Similarly, when I interview young lesbians and feminists for my articles and my books and my podcasts, I learn a huge amount from them. Whether we agree or not, it's always really valuable. When it comes to role models, we had no one. We had terrible role models when I was during the 1970s until Martina Navratilova in 1981 came out as a lesbian. We had no one. And I can't tell you, for those that weren't around at that time, who aren't lesbians, who didn't go through that particular experience, it was breathtaking in its importance that there was somebody who was successful, she was skilled, funny, out as a lesbian and proud, who was taking a real hit when Martina came out. She lost every penny of her sponsorship, every penny, and persisted and became the greatest tennis player ever known. That was just so important, whether you like tennis or not.
Mhm.
And we saw at the same time the press vilifying her, accusing her in headlines in tabloid newspapers that she was going to turn other girls gay. That was a quote that was used by one of the Australian tennis players who was a born again Christian or a Christian fundamentalist. I can't remember which one. Anyway, so that was terrible, but we saw her fight back against all of that and continue and thrive despite it. And the thing about gay men and lesbians, so around that time, I mean, before I came out in the early 70s, I think 1970 was the first meeting of the Gay Liberation Front. And Bev Jackson, who's one of the founders of Lesbian and Gay LGB Alliance, was the spokesperson for the very first meeting, which was in Highbury in North London. She was 19. And how brilliant is that? And how fabulous that we still got her now being as active and as kick-ass as she was then. But as Bev and others from those days have told me, the lesbians soon got sick of the sexism from the gay men in that old gay liberation front movement, which was supposed to be gay men challenging sexism as well as homophobia. And the lesbians all just left, and I mean, not every one of them, but most of the lesbians left and formed their own lesbian liberation group, which was much more part of feminism, of the women's liberation movement, because that's where we sit naturally. We're not going to have any liberation as lesbians unless all women have that, and vice versa. So same old with sexist men. And then, of course, we were forced teamed during the 80s when gay men had to put up with the absolutely terrible, almost beyond belief prejudice um, that came out of the AIDS crisis, as well as the death and illness and stigma. And lots of lesbians flocked to support those men that were affected, and understandably. And then Section 28 came as a result of that prejudice, really uh, growing and becoming much worse than it had been in recent years. And it was the first time that legislation targeted gay men and lesbians together. And so again, we were forced teamed. And then before we knew it, we were lesbian and gay, all one word. And then, of course, the rest about
Mhm.
all of the other letters and pseudo identities that became attached to it. And obviously, anything south of the B are usually straight male kinksters or women with interesting haircuts. So that there is no political movement when you look at the acronym. It's not a movement at all, just a collection of letters.
It's an excuse.
Well, we'd have to. We'd honestly, if we get any more added to that to that list, we'll have to start using Cyrillic because we're going to run out of the alphabet. So yeah, we have very different needs to gay men. It doesn't mean we can't come together on a basis of need, which definitely I've been pleased about seeing
Mhm.
gay men speaking out on our behalf as lesbians, on women's behalf, as well as obviously their own behalf with gender ideology rendering same-sex attraction obsolete. But otherwise, no, lesbians are women. We have very different needs, and we are all affected by sexism and misogyny, some of which comes from gay men.
Mm. Yeah, does indeed. Right, I'm not going to take more. Vicky, I'm sure. Let's get some questions in from the chat. I think there's quite a
Yeah,
lot going on.
loads of questions and comments, Julie. A great comment I thought from somebody was that there should be a band called the Lesbian Interveners.
Yeah,
Oh,
agreed.
that's a good idea, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so the first question is, what will it take for the Labour leadership to insist that its own party, councils, etc., follow the Supreme Court ruling?
You know, I couldn't vote for the Labour Party again unless there was some radical change. But I've got no idea who the hell I could vote for.
Mm.
What will it take? I don't know. I think, the cowardly idiots that are forward facing and the advisors to Starmer and other senior members who've been advising them for years on Stonewall law. I mean, they just need to be swept out and replaced. You can't take that party seriously when all of a sudden Keir Starmer decides that, all right, well, maybe trans women aren't women after all, but there's still 0.1% of women that have a penis. And look at the idiots like, oh, what's her name? The Nottingham MP, Nadia,
Whittam?
Whittam.
that's right, and others that come out with the most vacuous guff. There needs to be some discipline in the party so that they actually understand what the law is and that they understand what the voters want. But let's see what happens now that Stonewall law has been put to bed. Let's see if they come out with anything that's credible. And if anybody apologizes and says, well, we got that one wrong. Politicians do that. But
Mhm.
let's see if they do this. And of course, if Starmer apologizes to Rosie Duffield.
Yeah, yeah. Somebody in the chat has said, well, speaking as Liberal Democrat, they were thinking of voting Labour because at least there's people like Wes Streeting who's accepted the Cass review. Anyway,
And apologise for getting it wrong. I
yeah,
think.
Yeah, I think he's done really well, and he's, to be honest with you, I think he's the only one at the moment in the party with any guts and credibility.
yeah.
Mhm.
The next question is, somebody asked, have you been listening to the Women's Hour sections on the Supreme Court ruling? Have you any thoughts, and did they invite you on?
Well, I'd only just been on a couple of weeks before about my book, so they couldn't invite me back on. And the lesbians have been represented, obviously, by Kate from LGB Alliance, who did a great job. I have listened to it, and it's very obvious, and I know Nuala because she interviewed me um, just recently, and so I know her style. And it's really irritating the way that she caveats pretty much everything um, that our side says with some people will find this offensive. Some people will be really offended by this. You know that some people will really not like this, but not do it to those wazzocks
Mhm.
from Amnesty and that absolute bell end Robin Mora White. So, so where's the, women will find this offensive. You know that women will object to this. Where's all of those caveats?
Mhm.
So she's obviously, I don't think that she's ideologically driven. I think that she has been told by the producers that she has to make sure that there's not a crack through which the trans activists can start kicking off big style again. at Woman's Hour because they have really pretty much no platformed this debate for some time.
Mm.
And I think it's scandalous that they're top heavy on the arguments we use. Actually, today I just put up on my Substack an interview that I did in 2018 with Linda Riley. We had a debate on Woman's Hour. Linda Riley, who's the former publisher and owner of Diva magazine, who's a massive trans activist. And it reminded me that there were a few of those discussions back in 2018, because Kathleen Stock debated Sally Hines. And it's a thing of beauty. Sally Hines' stupidity is a thing of beauty. So listening to the one I did with Linda Riley just brought home again how much better Jane Garvey, who's the former presenter, was. She was so much more rigorous and fair. I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely fair. And I don't think that Nuala is. I think that she's become frightened of giving any space whatsoever to our arguments, but she has to.
Mm.
So it's something.
Yeah. The next question, something slightly different. What are your thoughts on the Nordic model? Is it the best option?
Yes, so I don't know if everyone knows what the Nordic model is. It's often called the abolitionist model in dealing with prostitution, focusing on the buyers, who are the men, so the Johns, the pimps and punters, and decriminalizing anyone selling sex, which is more often than not women, but not always, and providing with the huge amounts of money that would be saved from not focusing, from not having a hands-off approach and all the associated crime and nuisance that happens as a result of it, providing proper exit services for women to get out of prostitution, run by those that understand male violence and abuse, because that's what prostitution is. And these punters need dealing with, and that's what the Nordic model would do. They would be criminalized, but not. I mean, we're not advocating sending men to prison unless they are habitual offenders and a danger. And I don't see why not. These men are causing harm. They're paying for rape. They're paying for, at best, coerced sex, one-sided, non-consensual sexual pleasure. And I know through the research, my own research and the research that many women have done, that these men either become misogynists through paying for access to the inside of women's bodies, or they're already misogynist to start with, which is why they want to have sex with a woman who doesn't want to have sex with him. So, yeah, introduce the Nordic model, absolutely right. I know there's some support for that in the Labour Party, in the Conservative Party, not in the Lib Dems, never has been party policy, because it takes, of course, a libertarian approach to this. Sex work is work nonsense.
Mhm.
But yeah, absolutely, 100% support it.
Okay. I can see we've got about 5 minutes left, so I'll ask one more question and then hand back to Heather. And somebody said, how do we ever forgive those who capitulated and enabled all of this to happen?
Well, you don't. I think that there are two sets of people. Those that have wavered, been ground down, and at times I've absolutely been ground down, haven't always said or done the right thing. Those that have really struggled to try to do their best, but found that they were being terrorized by their own kids who were screaming at them about this issue and got themselves into a real mess with it. And then those Sandy Toksvig, Val McDermid, Nicola Sturgeon, Billy Bragg, Owen Jones, all of them that enabled this horror story against women and children to grow and to develop to a point where it overtook most people's sense. I can't forgive. And I feel very vengeful. And I try to pull myself back from that. I really do. But I want these people to get their comeuppance because what they have done is unforgivable, which is why we can't forgive. And I don't mean we should spend our time plotting their downfall, because I think that, quite frankly, that will come. But the idea that we can just smile sweetly and think, oh, well, they've changed their minds now. No, no, never.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's good. And then really final little one. People are asking about your relationship with James Dreyfus. Google tells me that you were married to James Dreyfus.
I mean, how on earth you expect me to kiss and tell? An absolute
He is the
disgrace.
father of our 4 children. We know we
There's three children. We miscounted. We
oh,
we took one home from the supermarket and had to take it back. Now, I mean, the thing is that James, joking apart, James is a fine example of a gay man who stood up for women, stood up for lesbians, and it's cost him dearly.
Mhm.
And I love him dearly. But the details of our lengthy, disastrous marriage be revealed.
Thank you, Judy.
thank you for that. On that, we've got a block booking at James's play when it's in Richmond. We must tell him we're selling for reduced discount for members. Members, if you haven't got your ticket, get on and get there.
Oh, I'll
Um,
see you there. I'm going to Richmond to see that play.
Well, let you know if it's the same night. No, don't think we'll take a banner. Don't want to embarrass him. On that, but I just want to pick up on that because I wanted to know whether you're angrier with women who are lesbian than like Val McDermott, for instance, you mentioned her, or we just angry at them all. Well, is it?
No, I'm angry at them all. And the thing is uh, that those that have no business in giving away our rights, in other words, those that have never fought for the rights for lesbians, for women in general, I'm very angry at them when we're told, don't we realize that trans women of color fought for queer women's rights, as I was when I was in Vancouver recently? How dare they? How dare they? Um, if you fought for the rights that we have, then you've played a part in that proud history. If you've just taken and benefited from the rights that we fought for, and you think that you've got the right to give them away, no, no.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie Bindel. Thanks for your book. Thoroughly recommend it again. Don't have to be a lesbian to read it and enjoy it. Your podcast, the Lesbian Project podcast with Kath Stock, which is fabulous and very funny. You've got brilliant humor. Maybe there's a little comedy sitcom or something in there somewhere. You're very good, but that's also very entertaining, even if you're not lesbian. So thank you very much, Julie, for all your work, for all your efforts, for all your output, which is superb and much appreciated by us all. I know on behalf of the network, I want to say thank you for coming on and thank you for just being. Thanks very much. Off you go. And
Thank you to all of you as well.
okay, take care.
You
Bye,
too.
Julie.